Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. Between 1972 and 1973, at least 7 young women vanished while hitchhiking in Sonoma County, California. Their bodies later discovered in rural ravines and creek beds. The perpetrator moved through the fog-shrouded highways of Santa Rosa with calculated precision, selecting vulnerable targets who would never reach their destinations. Maureen Sterling and Yvonne Weber disappeared on February 4, 1972, after leaving an ice skating session. The two friends had been enjoying a typical winter evening when they made the decision to hitchhike home. Their remains would not be found until December 28th of that same year, skeletal and bound, discarded like refuse in a remote location accessible only to someone who knew the terrain. The pattern that emerged revealed a predator who understood the geography of Sonoma County intimately. Kim Wendy Allen, 19 years old, was found on March 4, 1972, her body bearing evidence of strangulation following an earlier assault. The killer had positioned her remains near an embankment along a creek bed, a signature that would repeat across subsequent discoveries. The location suggested the perpetrator transported victims to predetermined disposal sites rather than selecting them spontaneously. Lori Lee Cursa, who had been reported as a runaway, was located on December 14, 1972, with a broken neck. The medical examiner determined that her demise had occurred through deliberate force applied to the cervical vertebrae, ruling out any possibility of accidental trauma from a fall or vehicular incident. Carolyn Davis met her end through strychnine poisoning. Her body discovered on July 31, 1973. The use of poison marked a departure from the strangulation methods employed in previous incidents, suggesting either an evolution in technique or a different perpetrator altogether. Strychnine causes painful convulsions before respiratory failure, indicating prolonged suffering that differed from the rapid asphyxiation methods used on other victims. Before her disappearance, Davis had left a note for her mother that read, "Dear Mom, don't worry too much about me. Love, Carolyn." The final known victim in the series was Teresa Walsh, 23 years old, found hogtied and strangled on December 28, 1973. Her positioning mirrored that of earlier victims, with the same distinctive rope work and placement near a ravine, reinforcing investigative theories about a single perpetrator with specific ritualistic preferences that extended beyond mere disposal convenience. In 1979, an unidentified woman was discovered in a duffel bag, hogtied in the same manner as Walsh. Forensic anthropologists determined she had been deceased for approximately 3 years, placing her demise within the active timeline of the other incidents. This Jane Doe remained nameless for decades, her identity representing one of the most frustrating aspects of the investigation. Without identification, investigators could not trace her movements before the encounter or establish connections to the other victims. In November 2023, the 1979 Jane Doe was identified through forensic genealogy as Nanette Suzanne Overacre, who was 19 when she disappeared in 1975. The variation in methods, strangulation, poisoning, blunt force trauma, complicated efforts to establish a definitive connection between all victims, though the geographic clustering and victim selection suggested a unified predatory pattern. All victims were found within a 15-mile radius, and all had been hitchhiking when they disappeared. Investigators pursued numerous suspects over the decades. The Zodiac killer entered consideration due to symbolic elements found near some scenes, though no concrete forensic links could be established between the Zodiac's confirmed crimes and the Santa Rosa series. Ted Bundy, who was active in the Pacific Northwest during this period, was ruled out through alibi verification, placing him in Washington state during several of the disappearances. Arthur Lee Allen, a Zodiac suspect who lived in the Bay Area, drew scrutiny but lacked physical evidence tying him to the Santa Rosa cases. Frederick Manali, Jack Boken, and Jim Mordecai all emerged as persons of interest, with DNA samples from Mordecai submitted for analysis in 2022. Each suspect had lived in or frequented Sonoma County during the relevant period, but none could be definitively connected through the limited forensic evidence available from 70s-era crime scene processing. The motive appeared rooted in opportunistic predation, with hitchhikers representing accessible targets in an era when such travel was common among the demographic. Young women hitchhiking alone or in pairs were particularly vulnerable, unable to control who stopped to offer them transport. The killer's familiarity with remote dumping locations indicated either residence in Sonoma County or extensive knowledge of its rural geography, including unpaved roads and creek access points rarely visited by the public. Recent documentary examination in HBO's The Truth About Jim explored Mordecai's potential involvement, though no arrests have resulted from renewed investigative efforts. The case remains open, with cold case detectives continuing to review forensic evidence as DNA technology advances. What connects these women to a case where evidence pointed in a completely different direction? Murder of Cherry Jo Bates. On the evening of October 30th, 1966, 18-year-old Cherry Jo Bates arrived at the Riverside City College Library in Riverside, California, intending to study before returning home. When she approached her vehicle in the parking area later that night, she discovered it had been deliberately disabled. The distributor coil and condenser had been removed, rendering the car inoperable. This mechanical sabotage trapped Bates in the isolated parking area, where her attacker waited in the darkness between rows of vehicles. The encounter that followed demonstrated Bates fought desperately for survival. Evidence collected from the scene included torn hair, skin beneath her fingernails, and defensive wounds across her hands and arms. The medical examiner documented multiple stab wounds and slashing injuries concentrated on the torso and neck, indicating a prolonged struggle lasting several minutes. A Timex watch was found near the body. Crystal face shattered and band torn, suggesting it had been ripped from the perpetrator's wrist during the confrontation. Investigators also recovered a distinctive shoe print measuring size 8 to 10 and multiple fingerprints from the vehicle's exterior and door handles. The motive remained elusive throughout the initial investigation. There was no evidence of theft, as Bates' textbooks, purse, and personal belongings remained undisturbed at the scene. The medical examiner found no indication of additional criminal intent beyond the fatal injuries, ruling out certain motives common in attacks on young women. Months after the incident, letters arrived at the Riverside Police Department and local newspaper, with the writer claiming responsibility and stating the attack stemmed from rejection. One particularly disturbing correspondence included the phrase, "Making her pay for the brush-offs. It's about time for you to die." However, these communications would later be identified as fabrications unconnected to the actual perpetrator. Ross Sullivan, who worked at the college library and had access to the parking area, emerged as an early person of interest. Sullivan's behavioral patterns following the incident drew investigative attention, including an unexplained absence from work and physical description matching witness accounts. Decades later, amateur investigators proposed Gary Francis Post as a suspect, claiming connections to both the Bates incident and the Zodiac series. The Riverside Police Department rejected these theories, maintaining that no credible forensic links existed to support amateur speculation. The potential connection to the Zodiac killer has generated substantial debate within investigative circles. Some forensic document examiners noted similarities between taunting letters received after Bates' passing and confirmed Zodiac correspondence, particularly in the tone and phrasing of threats. A poem titled The Confession arrived at authorities with disturbing details about the incident that had not been released publicly. In 2021, the Riverside Police Department announced that DNA from the stamps on the 1967 confession letters identified a man who admitted to writing them as a disturbed teenager's prank, officially disconnecting the letters from the actual killer. This revelation separated the correspondence from the actual crime, though it did not advance identification of Bates' killer or explain why someone would falsely claim responsibility years after the event. The physical evidence preserved from 1966 offers potential for resolution through modern DNA technology. The torn hair, biological material beneath Bates' fingernails, and the recovered watch all contain genetic material that could be analyzed with contemporary extraction and sequencing methods unavailable during the original investigation. The fingerprints lifted from the scene remain unmatched in existing databases, suggesting the perpetrator either had no prior criminal record or successfully avoided subsequent charges that would have required fingerprint submission. The next case would unfold in circumstances that left more questions than answers. Mitrice Richardson. On September 17, 2009, 24-year-old Mitrice Richardson exhibited unusual behavior while dining at Jeffrey's restaurant in Malibu, California. Staff members noted she appeared disoriented and made statements that alarmed other patrons, speaking about matters unrelated to her surroundings. When the meal concluded, Richardson could not provide payment for the bills she had accumulated, leading restaurant management to contact law enforcement. Officers arrested Richardson for the unpaid bill and discovered substances in her possession during the booking process. She was transported to the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station for processing and temporary detention while authorities determined appropriate charges. At approximately midnight, deputies released Richardson from custody without her vehicle, cellular phone, or purse, all of which remained impounded at the station. Despite her earlier disorientation and the late hour, no arrangements were made for safe transportation or temporary shelter. The decision to release Richardson into the darkness of an unfamiliar area would later generate substantial controversy and civil litigation. Richardson walked from the station into the surrounding darkness of the Santa Monica Mountains, an area characterized by steep terrain, dense vegetation, and limited residential development. A resident in the Monte area reported seeing Richardson in their backyard several hours after her release, appearing confused and attempting to navigate through residential property. This sighting represented the last confirmed observation of her alive by an independent witness. Nearly 11 months passed before Richardson's remains were discovered on August 9, 2010, in a remote section of Dark Canyon by park rangers searching for illegal marijuana grow operations. The location sat approximately 6 miles from the sheriff's station where she had been released, deep within terrain that would have required substantial effort to access on foot. Her body was found unclothed and in an advanced state of decomposition, having been subjected to natural mummification processes in the dry canyon environment, characterized by low humidity and minimal insect activity. The condition of the remains complicated forensic analysis, with soft tissue deterioration preventing standard toxicology testing and injury assessment. The coroner was unable to determine a definitive cause of demise through examination of the skeletal remains and degraded tissue. While the LA County coroner officially listed the cause of death as undetermined, the removal of her remains by authorities without the coroner's presence severely compromised the scene, leading to a settlement with the family over the mishandling of the investigation. The absence of clothing and the remote location raised questions about how Richardson had reached the canyon and what had transpired during the 11 months between her release and discovery. Richardson's family immediately questioned the official narrative. Her father, Michael Richardson, stated his belief that his daughter had been taken against her will, asserting she was some nurse. She was took there against her will, tortured, and when they was done, they killed her. The family filed civil proceedings against Los Angeles County, alleging improper release procedures that placed Richardson in danger and inadequate response to reports of her disappearance during the months she remained missing. These proceedings concluded with a financial settlement. Though no admission of wrongdoing accompanied the resolution and no criminal charges emerged from the internal investigation. A significant development occurred when investigative journalists identified Rick Forsberg as a person of interest through database searches and geographic analysis. Forsberg maintained a criminal history involving property offenses and had been living in the Montenegro area during Richardson's disappearance, placing him in proximity to both her last sighting and the eventual discovery location. A search of Forsberg's former hideout location revealed items of women's clothing and personal effects in the vicinity, though definitive links to Richardson could not be established through the degraded material. However, Forsberg passed away in 2019 before investigators could conduct formal questioning or pursue charges, eliminating the possibility of direct testimony or DNA comparison. The motive for Richardson's fate remains speculative among investigators and her family. Some officials theorize that her mental state, potentially influenced by a bipolar condition that had not been previously diagnosed or disclosed, led her to wander into dangerous terrain where she succumbed to environmental exposure over a period of days. Others, including her family and independent investigators, maintained that she encountered someone with harmful intent during her vulnerable hours after release, possibly Forsberg or an unidentified individual who took advantage of her disoriented state. The lack of definitive physical evidence from the decomposed remains prevented resolution of these competing theories through forensic analysis. A $20,000 reward remains offered for information leading to case resolution. But in another Hollywood residence decades earlier, investigators found more evidence, yet less clarity. Georgette Bauerdorf. On the morning of October 12, 1944, neighbors at an apartment building on Fountain Avenue in West Hollywood discovered 20-year-old Georgette Bauerdorf deceased in her bathtub. A bandage had been forced down her throat, causing asphyxiation, and evidence indicated she had been subjected to a violent struggle prior to her passing. The crime scene revealed defensive injuries across Bauerdorf's body, with bruising on her arms and hands demonstrating she had fought desperately against her assailant for several minutes before being overpowered. The nightlight in her bedroom had been deliberately unscrewed, suggesting the perpetrator sought darkness to conceal his actions or his identity. This detail implied premeditation and familiarity with the apartment's layout. Bauerdorf came from a wealthy oil family with substantial holdings in Texas and California, and had been living independently in the West Hollywood apartment while working as MC, hostess at the Hollywood Canteen, a servicemen's club frequented by military personnel during World War II. The canteen served as a recreation facility where servicemen could dance, socialize, and meet Hollywood celebrities between deployments or during training. Her vehicle was discovered abandoned several blocks from the apartment, with investigators noting the interior showed signs of hasty exit, including the driver's door left ajar and the keys still in the ignition. The positioning of the car and the trajectory of the perpetrator's escape route suggested someone familiar with the neighborhood's layout and side streets that would allow rapid departure without passing main thoroughfares where police might patrol. A neighbor reported hearing Bauerdorf's desperate cries, "Stop! Stop! You're killing me!" during the late evening hours, but did not immediately contact authorities, assuming the sounds represented a domestic disagreement between residents rather than a life-threatening situation. This delay in reporting may have cost Bauerdorf crucial minutes when intervention might have been possible. The timing of the screams helped investigators narrow the window of the attack to between 10:30 and 11:15 in the evening. The motive appeared to involve an assault that escalated beyond the perpetrator's initial intentions, with the medical examiner determining the act had occurred before the fatal asphyxiation. There was no evidence of theft, as Bauerdorf's jewelry, including expensive pieces from her family's collection, and valuable items remained untouched in the apartment. The medical examiner determined the assault had occurred first, with the bandage used to silence Bauerdorf becoming the instrument of her demise when it was forced too deeply into her airway. The deliberate unscrewing of the nightlight and the forced entry through a window indicated premeditation rather than spontaneous action, suggesting the perpetrator had observed Bauerdorf's routines and selected a specific time for the attack. Investigators focused on servicemen who had frequented the Hollywood canteen, where Bauerdorf had danced with numerous military personnel as part of her volunteer work. Detectives compiled lists of servicemen who had shown particular interest in Bauerdorf or had requested multiple dances with her during canteen events. Witness descriptions mentioned a tall soldier who had been seen near Bauerdorf's apartment building on multiple occasions in the weeks before her passing, appearing to observe the entrance and residents' comings and goings. This individual was never identified, despite extensive interviews with canteen attendees and military personnel stationed in the Los Angeles area. Cosmo Volpe, a serviceman who knew Bauerdorf from the canteen, underwent questioning but was ultimately cleared through alibi verification, placing him at his barracks during the estimated time of the incident. Jeremiah John Reed, sometimes associated with the name Jack Anderson Wilson in theories, and several other individuals provided false confessions, but investigators primarily focused on a soldier named Gordon Lee Cotter, whose suspicious behavior and pawned items drew significant scrutiny before he was eventually ruled out. Investigators determined Sumter's statements contained factual inaccuracies about the apartment layout, the positioning of Bauerdorf's body, and specific details about the crime scene that had been deliberately withheld from public disclosure. His confession could not be corroborated with physical evidence or witness testimony placing him in California during the relevant period. The inquest into Bauerdorf's passing ruled the manner as criminal action by person or persons unknown. The case went cold due to external pressures to close it quickly, with some historians suggesting wartime sensitivities and the Bauerdorf family's prominence influenced the investigative approach and subsequent decision to cease active pursuit of suspects. Decades later, amateur theorists proposed connections to the Black Dahlia case that occurred 3 years later. Though no credible forensic or circumstantial links supported these speculations beyond superficial similarities in victim demographics. The circumstances would prove equally complicated in a case involving Hollywood royalty. Bonnie Lee Backley. On the evening of May 4, 2001, 44-year-old Bonnie Lee Backley was found with fatal injuries in a vehicle parked on a side street near Vitello's restaurant in Studio City, California. She had been dining with her husband, actor Robert Blake, moments before the incident. Blake reported that he had returned to the restaurant to retrieve a firearm he legally carried for protection, and upon returning to the vehicle, discovered Backley wounded. Emergency responders transported her to a medical facility where she was pronounced deceased from wounds sustained to her head and shoulder. Backley's history as someone who had engaged in questionable financial schemes, targeting men through personal advertisements, became central to the investigation. She had maintained relationships with multiple men simultaneously, including Christian Brando, son of actor Marlon Brando. When Backley became pregnant, paternity testing determined Robert Blake was the biological father, leading to their marriage. Blake had allegedly been unhappy with the arrangement, viewing the marriage as a necessity rather than a desired union. Prosecutors arrested Blake in April 2002, alleging he had orchestrated Backley's demise through hired individuals. The criminal trial that followed featured testimony from 2 stuntmen who claimed Blake had approached them about eliminating Backley. However, their credibility faced challenges during cross-examination, with defense attorneys highlighting inconsistencies in their accounts and potential motivations for false testimony. The prosecution's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and witness statements that could not be independently corroborated with physical forensics. The jury acquitted Blake of all criminal charges in March 2005, determining the prosecution had not met the burden of proof beyond reasonable doubt. However, a subsequent civil proceeding found Blake liable for Backley's wrongful passing, resulting in a $30 million judgment that was later reduced to $15 million after an appeals court ruled the initial award was excessive. This dual outcome, criminal acquittal and civil liability, created a legal paradox that continues to generate debate. Christian Brando had previously made threatening statements toward Backley, telling her, "You're lucky somebody ain't out there to put a bullet in your head," during a recorded telephone conversation. Investigators examined Brando's whereabouts during the incident, but found no evidence placing him at the scene. The actual perpetrator of the shooting has never been definitively identified through forensic evidence. The weapon used was recovered from a dumpster near Blake's residence, but ballistic analysis could not conclusively link it to Blake or any other individual. The case remains criminally unsolved in the sense that no one has been convicted of the actual act. Another case involving Hollywood fame would present investigators with equally contradictory evidence. Natalie Wood. On November 29, 1981, actress Natalie Wood was discovered deceased in the waters off Santa Catalina Island, California. She had been aboard a yacht named Splendor with her husband, actor Robert Wagner, co-star Christopher Walken, and boat captain Dennis Davern. The Los Angeles County coroner initially classified the incident as accidental drowning, with contributing factors of intoxication. However, the circumstances surrounding her entry into the water remained unclear, with conflicting accounts from those aboard the vessel. Wood harbored a well-documented fear of water, stemming from childhood experiences and prophecies. This psychological element made her voluntary entry into the ocean during late-night hours seem inconsistent with her established behavioral patterns. The medical examiner documented bruises and abrasions across Wood's body, with some injuries appearing inconsistent with a simple fall from the yacht. These findings prompted questions about what preceded her entry into the water. Wagner and Walken provided statements indicating they had engaged in a heated discussion during the evening, though both maintained the disagreement was verbal rather than physical. Captain Davern later suggested he heard a more intense confrontation than initially reported, though his changing accounts over decades raised questions about reliability. The yacht's inflatable dinghy was found adrift near the location where Wood's body was recovered, suggesting she may have attempted to secure it or board it before entering the water. In 2011, authorities reopened the investigation as a suspicious occurrence rather than a straightforward accident. This reclassification stemmed from advances in understanding the forensic evidence, particularly the bruising patterns that suggested possible struggle or forcible contact before the drowning. In 2018, the Sheriff's Department named Wagner a person of interest after new witnesses, including boat captain Dennis Davern, provided updated accounts of a violent argument on the deck of the yacht shortly before Wood disappeared. In May 2022, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department announced they had run out of leads and the case had gone cold. However, they explicitly stated that Robert Wagner has not been cleared and remains a person of interest in the investigation. Though the classification of the incident remained drowning and other undetermined factors. This careful wording acknowledged the ambiguity surrounding the moments before Wood entered the water. Theories ranged from Wood attempting to secure the dinghy and accidentally falling, to her deliberately entering the water in a state of distress, to more sinister scenarios involving confrontation aboard the yacht. The absence of direct witnesses to Wood's entry into the water prevented definitive conclusions. The physical evidence, bruising, intoxication levels, body, positioning when recovered, could support multiple narratives. The case remains technically open, with the manner of demise classified as undetermined rather than conclusively accidental or criminal. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The pattern of unresolved tragedies would extend beyond Hollywood's spotlight. Georgia Lee Moses. On August 13, 1997, a young woman was last observed leaving a gas station on Sebastopol Road in Santa Rosa, California, accompanied by an unidentified man. Her body was discovered on August 22, 1997, under a grove of trees near the off-ramp of Highway 101 and Petaluma Boulevard North. She had been there for roughly a week before being found by a passing motorist. The medical examiner determined the cause of demise to be asphyxiation through strangulation, with the body found unclothed and in a state of decomposition that complicated the collection of physical evidence. The victim had been living in circumstances that placed additional strain on her family structure, with maternal mental health challenges creating an environment where she assumed caretaker responsibilities. These domestic pressures did not diminish the tragedy of her passing, but rather highlighted the vulnerability that may have placed her in the perpetrator's path. The gas station where she was last seen became the focal point of the initial investigation, with surveillance footage and witness statements providing the only substantive leads in the case. Investigators developed a composite sketch of the man observed accompanying the victim from the gas station. The sketch depicted a male individual, and authorities distributed this image widely throughout Sonoma County and surrounding areas, hoping to generate recognition from community members who might identify the subject. Despite extensive circulation of the composite, no credible identifications emerged during the immediate investigation or in the years that followed. The man's identity remains unknown, representing the primary investigative obstacle in pursuing justice. The motive for the strangulation has never been established through evidence or witness testimony. The absence of the victim's clothing at the discovery site suggested possible criminal intent beyond the fatal act, though the state of decomposition prevented definitive forensic conclusions about what preceded the strangulation. The location where the body was deposited, off Highway 101 near Petaluma, indicated transportation from the Santa Rosa area where she was last seen, requiring either a vehicle or extensive knowledge of walking routes between the two locations. The investigation brought attention to disparities in media coverage and investigative resources allocated to cases involving victims from different demographic backgrounds. Her sister, Angel Turner, has maintained advocacy for resolution throughout the decades since the incident, stating, "She practically raised me. She embodied what a mom was." Turner's continued public appeals have kept the case in periodic media attention, though no substantial leads have materialized from renewed publicity efforts. In April 2025, an editorial in the Press Democrat called for renewed focus on achieving justice in the case, emphasizing the importance of resolving cold cases regardless of time elapsed. A $50,000 reward remains available for information leading to the identification, arrest, and conviction of those responsible. The reward represents one of the larger monetary incentives offered in Northern California cold cases, though it has not yet generated the breakthrough investigators require. The case remains open with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, which periodically reviews the evidence file as forensic technologies advance. The composite sketch continues to represent the most tangible lead, though the passage of nearly 3 decades has complicated efforts to locate witnesses who might have encountered the unidentified man in August 1997. DNA evidence preservation from the victim's remains offers potential for future genetic genealogy applications, should investigators identify comparison samples linked to the composite sketch subject. The lack of similar strangulation cases in the immediate geographic area during that period suggests the perpetrator either operated as an isolated offender or successfully concealed other incidents. Family members continue to seek closure while acknowledging the investigative challenges inherent in cases where physical evidence was limited by decomposition and where the primary suspect has never been identified through traditional investigative methods. Yet another case would demonstrate how proximity to celebrity culture complicated investigations. Christa Helm. On February 12, 1977, aspiring actress Christa Helm was discovered deceased on a sidewalk in West Hollywood near her agent's home on Lloyd Place, having been attacked shortly after she parked her car. The victim of a frenzied attack that investigators characterized as indicative of rage rather than calculated execution. The medical examiner documented between 22 and 23 stab wounds across her body, accompanied by blunt force trauma, suggesting the perpetrator had used multiple implements during the assault. The excessive nature of the injuries pointed toward personal motivation rather than robbery or opportunistic crime. Helm had relocated to Los Angeles from Milwaukee with aspirations of establishing herself in the entertainment industry. She had secured minor roles in television productions and worked as a model while pursuing more substantial acting opportunities. Her social circle included numerous individuals connected to the Hollywood establishment, from established actors to industry executives and producers. This network of associations would become central to investigative theories about motive and perpetrator identity. The most significant element discovered during the initial investigation was Helm's personal diaries and recorded tapes, which allegedly documented her relationships and encounters with various celebrities. Investigators theorized that these materials, which contained detailed accounts of affairs and private interactions, may have motivated someone to silence Helm before the information became public. While Helm's black book and certain recordings were missing, investigators did recover some of her diaries, which contained names of high-profile celebrities, though these leads never resulted in an arrest due to the lack of physical evidence linking those named to the street-side attack. Before her passing, Helm had communicated concerns about her circumstances to acquaintances. A postcard she sent contained the statement, "I am in way over my head here," suggesting she had become aware of dangers stemming from her documented relationships or other activities. This correspondence, examined during the investigation, indicated Helm possessed consciousness of threats, though she did not specify their source or nature in writing that has been preserved. Two individuals emerged as significant persons of interest during the investigation. Patty Collins, an associate of Helm's, disappeared shortly after the incident and has never been located by authorities. Collins' sudden absence, combined with her connection to Helm's social circle, generated substantial suspicion, though no physical evidence linked her to the crime scene. Rudy Mazzella, another associate, allegedly made statements suggesting knowledge of or involvement in Helm's demise, though these claims could not be substantiated through forensic evidence or reliable witness corroboration. Neither Collins nor Mazzella has been formally charged, and Collins' continued absence prevents investigators from conducting contemporary questioning. Between 2006 and 2008, detectives reopened the case and conducted fresh interviews with individuals from Helm's original social circle. These interviews included actors, roommates, family members, including her sister Marissa, who suggested jealousy as a possible motive, and various other associates who might have possessed information withheld during the initial investigation. The renewed effort generated additional context about Helm's relationships and activities, but did not produce forensic evidence sufficient to support charges against any specific individual. The motive speculation centers on the missing diaries and their potential to damage reputations or reveal information that powerful individuals wished to suppress. The entertainment industry connections inherent in Helm's documented relationships created investigative complications, with some witnesses potentially reluctant to provide complete information about their own associations or knowledge of others' activities. The rage evident in the attack's ferocity suggested personal animosity or panic about exposure rather than premeditated assassination. though the theft of the diaries indicated planning beyond the immediate violent act. In March 2025, a podcast episode examined the case anew, exploring the various theories and suspect profiles that have emerged over nearly 5 decades. The case remains officially open with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, though active investigation has been limited by the death of many original witnesses and suspects over the decades since 1977. The absence of the diaries and tapes prevents modern forensic analysis that might have revealed fingerprints, DNA, or other trace evidence from individuals who handled these materials. The circumstances would prove equally puzzling in a case involving the avant-garde music scene. Peter Ivers. On March 3, 1983, musician and television host Peter Ivers was discovered deceased in his downtown Los Angeles loft. The victim of repeated blunt force trauma delivered to his head with what investigators determined to be a hammer or similar heavy implement. The crime scene presented immediate questions about whether the perpetrator had been known to Ivers or had gained entry through forced access. The loft's location, in an area frequented by artists and musicians, meant numerous individuals potentially had knowledge of Ivers' residence and routines. Ivers had been born on September 20, 1946, in Illinois, spending his first 2 years in Chicago before his father's passing in 1949 prompted family relocation. After a brief period in Arizona, the family settled in Brookline, Massachusetts, where Ivers was raised from age 4. He demonstrated exceptional academic aptitude, studying classical languages at Harvard University while simultaneously pursuing musical interests that would define his career trajectory. His intellectual capabilities combined with musical talent positioned him uniquely within both academic and entertainment circles. By the early 1980s, Ivers had established himself as host of the cable television program New Wave Theater, which showcased emerging punk and new wave musical acts. His eclectic personality and willingness to feature unconventional performers made the program influential within underground music communities, though it generated limited mainstream commercial success. This positioning between underground credibility and attempts at broader recognition meant Ivers interacted with diverse personalities, some with unstable behavioral patterns or substance dependencies common in that era's music scene. The forensic evidence at the scene indicated the attack had been sustained and focused, with multiple impacts to Ivers' skull, causing fatal cranial trauma. Private investigator David Charbonneau, who examined the case, stated, "I do not believe it was a break-in," suggesting the perpetrator had either been admitted voluntarily by Ivers or possessed access to the loft through prior arrangement or relationship. The absence of defensive wounds on Ivers' hands indicated the attack may have commenced without warning, preventing him from mounting resistance before incapacitation occurred. David Jove, a collaborator on New Wave Theater, emerged as a person of interest due to what investigators and associates characterized as a contentious relationship with Ivers. Reports indicated tensions over creative control and financial arrangements related to the television program. Though these disputes had not escalated to documented threats or physical confrontations prior to Ivers' demise, Jove maintained his innocence and was never charged, though suspicions among Ivers' friends and associates persisted. Jove passed away in 2004 without ever being formally accused of involvement. The motive for the attack remains speculative among investigators. Theories have ranged from creative disputes with collaborators to robbery by someone who gained access to the loft, to conflicts stemming from Ivers' social circle within the volatile Los Angeles music scene. The sustained nature of the bludgeoning suggested either rage or determination to ensure death, ruling out warning attacks or attempts at intimidation that escalated unintentionally. Investigators determined the murder weapon was a heavy, industrial-strength gaffer's tape dispenser, or a similar heavy studio tool found at the scene, which supported the theory that the attack was spontaneous or committed with an opportunistic object found within the loft. The contamination of the crime scene by individuals who entered before authorities arrived complicated forensic analysis. Multiple people had moved through the loft after the discovery of Ivor's body, potentially disturbing evidence placement and introducing foreign materials that confused subsequent testing. This contamination, combined with the forensic limitations of early 1980s technology, meant that potential DNA evidence or trace materials were either compromised or unrecognizable with the analytical capabilities available at that time. A podcast examining the case was produced in 2023, featuring interviews with surviving associates and reviewing the investigative files accumulated over 4 decades. While podcasts like the LA Report have covered the case, the most definitive investigation remains the 2008 biography by Josh Frank, which helped prompt the LAPD to re-examine the case in the late 2000s. Though they ultimately found the 1983 crime scene contamination too severe to overcome. Despite renewed interest generated by such media attention, no new forensic evidence has emerged to advance identification of Ivor's killer. The case remains open with the Los Angeles Police Department, though active investigation has been minimal in recent decades, as leads have been exhausted and key witnesses have aged or passed away. But one case would eventually see movement after decades of silence. Asha Degree. On February 14, 2000, a young girl from Shelby, North Carolina, not California but included here due to its prominence in cold case discussions, was reported missing after walking away from her family's residence during early morning hours. Witnesses traveling along Highway 18 during a rainstorm observed her walking along the roadside, a highly unusual circumstance given the weather conditions and the hour. When vehicles stopped to offer assistance, she retreated into wooded areas adjacent to the highway, behavior that perplexed both witnesses and subsequent investigators attempting to understand her motivations. Asha had been described by family and educators as cautious and shy, exhibiting fear of dogs, storms, and darkness. These personality characteristics made her voluntary departure during a nighttime rainstorm seem inconsistent with established patterns, generating theories about whether she had been lured by someone she trusted or was fleeing circumstances at home. Her parents underwent polygraph examinations and were eliminated as suspects, with investigators determining the family environment did not contain indicators of circumstances that would prompt flight. In 2001, her backpack was discovered wrapped in plastic bags along Highway 18, approximately 26 miles from where she had last been seen. The backpack's discovery location suggested transportation by vehicle rather than continued foot travel, and the plastic wrapping indicated deliberate preservation or concealment by whoever had placed it at that site. The backpack contained personal items, but offered limited forensic leads at the time of discovery, given the technological capabilities available in the early 2000s. For nearly 25 years, the case remained classified as a missing person investigation, despite the absence of any credible sightings or communications from Asha after February 2000. In September 2024, authorities officially reclassified the case as a homicide investigation, marking a significant shift in investigative approach and resource allocation. This reclassification followed advances in forensic analysis of evidence preserved from the backpack and other materials collected during the original investigation. Court documents unsealed in late 2024 and early 2025 revealed that DNA found on Asha's undershirt and her trash bag-wrapped backpack matched Roy Dedman and Russell Underhill, now deceased, leading investigators to believe Underhill may have been involved in the initial encounter. These identifications prompted investigators to focus on the Dedman family, with members including Roy and Connie Dedman and their daughters emerging as persons of interest. Search warrants executed at Dedman family properties in April 2025 sought additional evidence that might establish how Asha's belongings came into contact with materials bearing Dedman family DNA. Text messages obtained through investigative warrants allegedly contained statements admitting involvement or knowledge of Asha's fate. Though the specific content of these communications has not been publicly disclosed by authorities conducting the investigation. The messages reportedly were exchanged among Dedman family members and may provide circumstantial evidence supporting theories about what occurred after Asha was last seen on Highway 18. As of late 2025, while no formal murder charges have been filed, Roy Dedman has been named as a primary suspect in the kidnapping and death of Asha Degree, with investigators currently processing over 40 units of electronic evidence seized from his properties. The motive for Asha's departure from her residence and subsequent disappearance has not been definitively established, even with the recent investigative developments. Theories range from grooming by someone she encountered through school or community activities, to accidental encounter with the Dedman family that escalated beyond initial intentions, to planned abduction that Asha may have been manipulated into facilitating through false promises or manufactured trust. Her mother, Aquila Degree, has maintained hope over the decades, stating, "I believe she's still alive." Though the homicide classification suggests investigators hold different conclusions based on evidence unavailable to the public. A $45,000 reward remains available for information leading to resolution, though the recent investigative activity suggests authorities may be approaching charges without relying on external tips. The final case would center on whether nature or human action caused a life to end. Michelle Von Emster. In 1994, the body of 25-year-old Michelle Von Emster was discovered in the waters off Sunset Cliffs in San Diego, California, presenting investigators with injuries that generated immediate debate about whether she had been the victim of a predatory animal or human actions. Her left leg was missing entirely, with the remaining skeletal structure showing what appeared to be clean separation at the femur. The San Diego County Medical Examiner officially ruled the death a shark attack, a classification that remains on her death certificate to this day, despite high-profile challenges from experts like Ralph Collier and David Charbonneau. Von Emster had survived cancer earlier in her life and had experienced traumatic circumstances, including documented situations involving religious authority figures. She had struggled with substance dependency issues and had adopted a transient lifestyle in the San Diego area, working intermittently as an art store clerk while residing in various temporary arrangements. These life circumstances placed her in contact with numerous individuals and reduced the stability that might have provided protective social structures or consistent routines observable by concerned parties. The forensic examination of Von Emster's remains revealed details that complicated the animal attack theory. Sand was present in her lungs, indicating she had inhaled beach sand while still alive, suggesting respiratory activity on the beach rather than solely in the water where drowning might occur. Expert Ralph Collier noted that the femur was snapped cleanly, which he argued was inconsistent with the sawing action of a great white's teeth, though the medical examiner countered that the spiral fracture was consistent with the force of a large predator's bite. Forensic analysis determined she had been alive during the injuries, ruling out post-mortem damage from scavengers or ocean conditions. Ralph Collier, a shark attack expert who reviewed the case, stated, "The break on Michelle's leg was not consistent with that of a shark attack," lending professional credibility to skepticism about the official explanation. Collier noted that shark attacks typically leave distinctive bite radius marks, tooth rake patterns, and crushing injuries different from what Von Emster's remains displayed. The absence of these characteristic indicators, combined with the unusual nature of the leg separation, suggested alternative explanations deserved serious investigative consideration. Two individuals emerged as persons of interest based on their proximity to Von Emster in the period before her demise. Edwin Decker, an acquaintance who had interacted with von Emster through the San Diego area social circles, drew investigative attention, though no physical evidence linked him to the incident. An unnamed individual described as having exhibited obsessive interest in von Emster was also examined as a potential suspect, though identifying information about this person has not been publicly disclosed and no charges have resulted from this investigative avenue. The motive, if human action was involved, remains speculative. Theories have included accidental harm during an altercation that the perpetrator then attempted to disguise as an animal attack, deliberate elimination connected to von Emster's knowledge of others' activities or circumstances related to her substance use that placed her in vulnerable situations with dangerous individuals. The presence of sand in her lungs suggested she had been on the beach, possibly incapacitated or restrained, while injuries were inflicted or occurred through circumstances not fully explained by available evidence. The official cause of demise has never been conclusively determined, with the case classified as undetermined rather than definitively accidental or criminal. This classification acknowledges the conflicting evidence and expert opinions without committing to a specific theory about what transpired at Sunset Cliffs. The debate between shark attack and human involvement has persisted through various true crime examinations and marine biology expert analyses, with no consensus emerging despite decades of periodic review. Recent examination by BuzzFeed's Unsolved series and other true crime media has kept the case in public awareness, though no new forensic evidence has been recovered that would definitively resolve the nature versus human question. The San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office maintains the file as an open case given the undetermined classification. Though active investigation is minimal, absent new evidence or witness information that might clarify the conflicting theories about von Emster's final hours. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.